It's Sunday night, and this is the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse, and I'm here for the next 2 hours, your host, your guide, as we look at life through a biblical lens and try to solve all the world's problems in 2 hours or less. Yes, I do know that I did not send out an email this week. It really wasn't my fault. There just wasn't enough time in the week in order to make all of that happen. We will try never to do that again. I think that's probably the second time in 17 years that I haven't done it. I was in Wilmington on Saturday all day for a funeral, dear saint of God, a young lady that I'd known for close to 20 years. And we just had to go. Now, some of you, upon hearing that, will respond, as a couple of you already have, saying, well, you were in Wilmington, I didn't see you, should let me know when you're coming. Not always possible. Not always possible. And it's a 4-hour race to the town, and 5 or 6 hours there, and a 4-hour race home, because on Sunday morning I have commitments. I have an elderly lady that we pick up. My wife and I pick her up for Sunday school. I lead singing in the church. I sing in the choir. There isn't really a way for me to stay overnight in Wilmington. And you say, well, you can always get a week off. You get a day. Yeah, but then you wouldn't have a show tonight because I worked last evening when I got home and all day today to make sure that I was ready to do this show. Without that, it just isn't going to work. I'm only one man. I can't do it all. It's been an interesting week. It's been a fun week in a lot of different ways. Certainly not the passing of a loved one, but in the news and roundabout, there's been all sorts of things that have popped up, and they just keep coming. It used to be on the weekends, everything died down. You pretty much had what you were going to have by Thursday or Friday. Nowadays, the weekends sometimes can be the most interesting of the days. I just heard today, coming home from church to do this show, fellows talking about Hillary and her health conditions and some of the things, and some of it was relatively new. It was interesting. Not that I would necessarily talk about it here, but it's that kind of thing that pops up every once in a while. We have a lot of different things to talk about tonight. Not quite sure how far we're going to get. If you look at your list on the Bible Forum webpage where you are, you'll find that there are a number of things that are listed. The State Department's recent assault on Israel is up there with the best of them. I've gotten several emails from folks pointing out the satanic temple that is trying to get into the state school system. Their idea is that if Child Evangelism Fellowship can be there, so can they. And of course, Child Evangelism Fellowship is there, having fought the battle all the way to the Supreme Court. They're permitted to be there. So you can bet money that the Satanists will get into the schools. And they'll have afternoon courses, games and different things that they'll play. We'll talk about that later as to what it might be. Some of you are in North Carolina, so you know where Burlington, North Carolina is. And there apparently has been some meetings up there for the last several weeks, 3, 5, 6, whatever it is, tent meetings. Somebody that I subscribe to got wind of this. I suppose people told him. He did some investigation, talked to some people there. We'll talk about how all that went. It's not what you think. I mean, it used to be in the old days, you had, I got a tent revival meeting, but it's different. And I'm a stickler for terminology. They don't put up a tent and preach the gospel to Christians. It's not a revival. It's an evangelistic meeting. but they like to call them revival. In your church, you probably have revivals. But for the weekend, Saturday morning, Saturday or Sunday morning and Sunday night, and maybe even Wednesday and other, it's evangelism. Well, if it's evangelism, call it that. If it's revival, call it that. And let's stop mixing apples and peaches. We've got an email that popped up this week, 8 problems that are plaguing children, written by a school teacher about his students. But these are the problems that were plaguing children 25 years ago. It's interesting to read the list. We're also going to look at the real reason that Columbus sailed the ocean blue. It could have been written today in our newspapers. We're going to look at the Pope. Pope is in the news on a regular basis. He's building a body of truth in his pronouncements. He did it again this week. And it's all in the same realm. And that realm is him, supposedly, looks like, perhaps is, that he is advocating for a one world religion. Isn't that interesting? We'll talk about some of that. We'll also talk a little bit about the chat room and how you need to be there. I understand if you want to engage, you have to have a password. You got to sign up and do that. Some of you don't really want to go that far. I understand that. I probably wouldn't either if it was just something passing by. But this is the Bible Forum. It's different. We'd love to hear from you. Phone lines are open at 843-732-0249 if you'd like to call in. Last I knew, they were working, so we'll see how that goes. That's a phone number that's available all week, by the way. And under most circumstances, I'll answer it. It comes right to my cell phone. But if it doesn't, you can leave a message, maybe a question, a topic suggestion, something of that nature. We'd be glad to work with it. I want to talk to you a little bit about global markets. I don't know if you're like me. You hear these things on the radio, maybe driving along, or on TV, and there are always investment companies that are telling you that the world is going to come to an end in about 20 minutes and all your money's going to be worthless, the banks are going to be shut down, and you need to buy whatever it is that they're pushing. Usually it's gold or silver. Well, economists are telling us that the U.S. recovering from the recession of 2007, has actually statistically been the slowest recovery in U.S. history. When you look at that and then you wander across the pond and you look at Great Britain and the Brexit, and all of the predictions that their economy was going to take a hit because of it, which didn't happen for the first week. And now we're starting to see signs of that predictable tumble. American economist and financial advisor Peter Schiff says the country is headed for a financial crisis. Now, I don't know if he's selling stuff, but according to him, he says the economy is in much worse shape today than it was before the Federal Reserve started trying to fix it. And inquiring minds want to know why. And the answer is because the problems that we're facing today were actually created by the Fed. The problems were created by monetary policy being too loose. He added that federal interest rates were too low when they were at 1%, and it actually inflated the housing bubble. People were still able to get those inexpensive, in terms of interest, mortgages. And also by keeping them at zero for 7 years. The damage the Fed has done, he says, to the economy this time is much greater than anything that was done in the past. He goes on to predict that the dollar is going to have to collapse because the Federal Reserve refuses to deflate the bubble by raising interest rates. You've seen that on the news, and going into the summer, they didn't want to do it. They really needed to do it. They've had meetings every month, and every month it comes out, well, we're going to still hold. Schiff is saying they should have raised it a year ago. What's that mean to you? Well, it means that your dollar is probably going to be worth less than it was last year. But it also means that there might be a banking holiday. There might be a point in time where the banks, like during the Great Depression, had to shut down and recalibrate. Do you have some money on hand? If it's at all possible, and it usually is, if you're willing to set something aside you really don't need, to accumulate just a few $100s that you can have in the house in case you need milk or bread or something. I was impressed this week at how dependent I am on banks. I carry debit cards, or I have a credit card. I very seldom have cash in my pocket. When I go to get a haircut, I got to run by the bank and get some money. Now, I know I could give her the debit card, but I don't want to do that. They have to pay when you do that, and it's old-fashioned. I like to pay cash. I also like to have a man cut my hair, but as you probably picked up, I go to her. It's an evolution. I'm what do you call it? Something in progress. I don't know where I'm going. Philosophers, economists, and politicians have it all wrong. We're being told that the problems of life are due to a number of negative actions or inactions by those who hold power, people like the government, businesses, media, educational facilities, and that sort of thing. The truth is that the problems of society are the same as the problems that individual human beings face. They come from the same source, and that is the human heart. Not the pump in your breast, but the very heart of who and what you are, which the Bible says is desperately wicked and deceitful above all things. Greed, selfishness, deceit, immorality, they're all spiritual problems. And I'm here to tell you that until the human heart changes, nothing else will. Until on our national level, these economists start looking at life honestly instead of selfishly, it's not going to change. The report this week was that our government airlifted $400 million to Iran, and that they sent this in an unmarked airplane on pallets at night. And at least one of the Iranian American captives that were being released, there were I think 4 of them, those folks had to sit on their airplane on the tarmac for 8 or 10 hours, 12 hours, whatever it was, until that cargo plane landed and the money was in hand. Then they got to go home. But it's not a ransom. According to the Wall Street Journal, according to the Washington Post, and many other outlets, this is the scenario that took place. And our government came out immediately and began to tell us it's not true. Now, if it walks like a duck and it quacks, it probably is a duck. And in government, especially at that level, there's a lot of lying goes on. And there's a significant amount of it that has to be done to keep people from going crazy or your enemies to get an advantage. I understand that. But there's a difference between just not telling the truth not telling anything and telling a lie. The Iranian government almost immediately began arresting Iranian Christian individuals and families. Other Muslim governments will probably do the same. They target these people for no real reason, but now they have another reason to do it. They might just get paid off. I don't think the Donald would do that, do you? Not too sure about the other one. Did you watch the Democrat National Convention? Did you see Khizr Khan stand up and go after the Donald? Have you heard the news in the last week or two? The father of a Muslim American soldier killed in Iraq has found himself caught up in a war of words with Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump. Khizr Khan is apparently not all that he presents himself to be. In the words of one immigration lawyer who specializes in something that is a highly controversial program, accused Khizr Khan of being part of a group, perhaps of a number of people, who are profiting by working our system in order to let immigrants buy their way into the United States. We have policies in place that allow for that. You're asking me? I don't know why. The website that Khan uses was shut down, but before it was demonstrated that it works to help clients with something called an E2 or an EB5 program. And these programs let overseas investors buy into U.S. companies. And in so doing, they provide green cards for those owners and for their family members. The EB5 is literally a, quote, citizenship for sale, unquote, program in which a visa for a whole family can be bought for as little as $500,000. One of the lawyers who was investigating this, talking about that, says it is literally a citizenship for sale, and it's an amazing deal compared to other countries. He referred to it as America being the Walmart of investor visa programs. One criticism is that it allows an immigrant to invest that $500,000 in almost any kind of a business and get a set of green cards in return. Any of their children under 21 years of age, immediate family, that sort of thing. He took that website down. The State Department of President Obama is again beginning to distance itself from Jerusalem. The top advisor to former U.S. President George W. Bush reported, quote, its obsession with housing construction, talking about Israel now, is certainly not shared by any Arab government, but it is apparently held by everyone working in the Near East Bureau. Elliot Abrams. senior fellow for Middle Eastern Studies at Washington, D.C., commenting on the attitude our State Department has relative to Jerusalem and the surrounding territory. Abrams served as Deputy Assistant to the President and Deputy National Security Advisor in the Bush 43 administration. He was referring back to his own counter-offensive against what he called the State Department's, quote, remarkable assault on Israel, end of quote. He says it is both in tone and content a new hostility and consists of plenty of sheer ignorance. In his blog entitled Pressure Points, Abrams this past Thursday blasted the American administration after State Department spokesman John Kirby released a statement accusing the Israeli government of, quote, systematically undermining the prospects for a two-state solution, end of quote, by engaging in what they called settlement activity, which according to them is corrosive to the cause of peace. That statement came just days before IDF Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot and a few days later Israeli National Security Council head Nagel arrived in the United States, reportedly to discuss defense cooperation between the two countries and a new U.S. aid package to Israel. Abrams said the statement coming and the timing that it did was suspicious. Not conclusive, but it adds more fuel to the fire to indicate that these folks, whether it's the Obama administration or the Hillary administration, Hillary being a former head of the State Department for Obama, it is pretty obvious that this is the way the Democrats are going to continue if they can get elected. He says the Sanders people will no doubt like the attack on Israel, but they will credit Obama for it, and it won't make them more likely to vote for Hillary. Why? Abrams asks. He says they do it out of conviction, a conviction that they have only a few more months to enlarge that famous daylight between the U.S. and Israel. Former Israeli ambassador to Canada labeled it an outpouring of hostility against the Jewish state, something that might be expected from the EU or from Iran, but coming from the United States, it seems to be shocking. He went on to equate the U.S. State Department with viewing Israel's resistance to settlement activity as the major source of evil in the world. No, it's not ISIS, it's not the Iranians getting a bomb, it's not North Korea's nuclear proliferation, it's not Syria, it's not Hezbollah, it's not hunger, it's not global warming. It's Israel's settlement issue. That's what's killing us on a global scale. This is myopia. This is a deliberate attack against our only ally in the region. And for those of us who are Christians, this is an attack by the United States government against God's people, God's land, the land He has promised will always be there, and that there will always be Jews there, and that when Jesus returns, He will put His foot down there. And they want to see all that go away. I don't think it has much to do with Israelis. I think it has a lot more to do with God. Israel's gearing up for the day after agreement. They honestly believe that Syria will join forces with Russia. Russia, as you know, has entered into an agreement with Turkey. Russia has entered into agreements with Syria to help in their fight against the rebels. But Israel's looking at a day when this is going to become even more prominent. Hebrew news site Walla is reporting that Israel is conducting war games in the northern part of their country, with the idea that should all of this come about, they will need to have this experience in that region. They point to a series of drills conducted by the IDF's Golani Brigade along the Syrian and Lebanese borders just last week. Israeli Northern Command Chief Major General Kochavi ordered drills to prepare for potential cross-border attacks and infiltrations. And he said if that occurred, the IDF, Israeli Defense Force, would retaliate with force. An entire battalion was deployed in the exercise to pose as Syrian civilians whom the soldiers in the field were to keep isolated from fire on either side. Meanwhile, assessments in the IDF are that the inter-Syrian agreement will lead not only to fighting against rebel jihadis, but with Iran's proxy, the Lebanon-based terrorist organization Hezbollah, which supports the Assad regime. In such an event, the IDF believes the need to maneuver deeper into Lebanon will be significantly greater than it was during Israel's war against Hezbollah just 10 years ago. Two major joint exercises conducted by U.S. Marine Corps and the IDF several weeks ago were undertaken. One called Kaya Green. Translation, come as you are when you get the green light, simulated a raid on enemy shores. The other, entitled Noble Shirley 2016, held in southern Israel, practiced counterterrorism techniques against ISIS. Earlier this month, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said they had agreed on, quote, concrete steps, end of quote, to achieve a truce in Syria, following the complete breakdown of the partial ceasefire they brokered in February. Things are heating up in the Middle East, and if you're not paying attention to that, you might get caught flat-footed in a lot of other areas. We've got some more stuff we want to talk about. We're going to take a break. I need to save this video. We're going to talk about the Satanic Temple next. Stay with me.